There's a debate right now about a bill that's going to come to the floor later on this year about raising the debt ceiling. Should we be raising the debt ceiling?
You have to. Talking about on the day that America can't pay its debt, that has potentially disastrous outcomes. And that means that once American debt goes into default, a lot of people can't own it anymore. And American debt doesn't cross default, but it's cumulative. The T-bill defaults, the next week T-bill defaults, the next week T-bill defaults, pension plans have to sell. It is so potentially dangerous. We shouldn't get anywhere near it.
And we are near it. That's J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon with me last week in an exclusive interview on Fox Business Mornings with Maria on the fiscal cliff the economy is facing. Late last week, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen informed Congress, wrote a letter to Kevin McCarthy that this week the department will begin taking extraordinary measures to avoid default on the $31.4 trillion in national debt. The Treasury is expected to exhaust all of its accounting maneuvers by early June, setting up a showdown in Congress over raising the debt ceiling. I am back with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Speaker, what are you going to do about the debt ceiling?
Well, as we hit this statutory debt limit once again, I do think it's worth a moment to pause and look, how did we get here? And first of all, Maria, there is no doom right today. The hundreds of billions of dollars the government currently has, we won't hit our debt limit to really this summer. So let's take a moment and realize, why did we get here? I mean, if you look just in the last 4 years that Democrats were in the majority, they increased discretionary spending by 30%. When Republicans were in majority for the 8 years prior, they didn't increase it by $1. So that's $400 billion a year we spend more. In the last 2 years, they have taken us from spending $4 trillion to $7 trillion. They have added $10 trillion in the next 10 years. We are now going to have deficits for $1 trillion a year for as long as the eye can see. So what I really think we would do is treat this like we would treat our own household. If you had a child, you gave them a credit card, and they kept hitting the limit, you wouldn't just keep increasing it. You'd first see, what are you spending your money on? How can we cut items out? Every government has to do this. Every state has to balance their budget, county, city. For the White House to say they won't even look at it, that they can't find 1 penny out of $1 of eliminating waste, I think they're just trying to put us into bankruptcy. What I am saying, and it's my conversation with the president on our first conversation, let's sit down together. Let's look at the places that we can change our behavior. The first thing I would say is, why don't you make the House and the Senate both produce a budget? They don't produce a budget, so you know they're wasting money. Why don't you say the House and Senate both have to do appropriation bills? The Senate didn't even do appropriation bills, and then 2 senators wrote a $1.7 trillion bill right before Christmas that no one could read. Are you going to tell me there's no waste in that?
Yeah.
Why don't we look at, this is hardworking taxpayers' money.
Right, and I understand
we can find and eliminate those things. That's all we're saying. Let's sit down and change our behavior for the good of America, because what we're going to do is bankrupt this country and bankrupt these entitlements if we don't change our behavior today.
But they're not going to do it. Speaker McCarthy, you know this. We've already seen the arrogance in full scale. Last week, Karine Jean-Pierre said there will be no negotiation. The Congress has to raise the debt ceiling. We will not get anywhere close to this. There will be no negotiation. Now, did you make an agreement with the Freedom Caucus that you would go back to 2022 spending levels? Because I spoke with Congressman Michael Waltz last week, and he said, if you do that, that's going to be a $75 billion cut in defense spending. Are you willing to cut defense spending to meet this and not have any negotiation with the White House as Joe Biden wants?
Well, first, let's just take a pause. If we go back to 22 levels, that was what we were spending just 2-3 weeks ago. That's not cutting defense by $75 billion. Does defense getting more than $800 billion, are there areas that I think they could be more efficient in? Yeah, eliminate all the money spent on wokeism. Eliminate all the money that they're trying to find different fuels and they're worried about the environment to go through. I want our men and women trained to be able to defend themselves, to secure, to have the best weapon systems possible. So yeah, I'm sure they can find some places that they could be more efficient. We have some of the best Navy SEALs, some of the best rangers. They come to me every single day as they serve in Congress and tell me where that waste is in the Pentagon and others and want to be more efficient. But every single level of government should be doing that. This is not our money. This is the hardworking taxpayers' money. We should start every day. How could we be more efficient? How can we deliver a more effective to the American public? And how can we do it in a more secure way that we don't spend as much? Why would we sit back and be so arrogant to say, no, there's no waste in government? Why wouldn't we look at all the money that poured out during COVID? What money of that has not been spent? Why wouldn't you pull that back in? Why wouldn't you make Congress and Senate produce?
But they're not going to agree to a spending cap. They're not going to agree to a spending cap.
Well, Maria, I don't believe that's the case, because when Donald Trump was president and when Nancy Pelosi was speaker, that's exactly what happened for them to get a debt ceiling lifted last time. They agreed to a spending cap. I believe we can sit down with anybody who wants to work together. I believe this president could be that person. That's the conversation I had with the president. I want to sit down with him now so there is no problem. I'm sure he knows there's places that we can change and put America on a trajectory that we save these entitlements instead of put them into bankruptcy the way they have been spending. So make us do a budget. Make us do appropriations out in the public. Just doing that would save tremendous amounts of money.
So just to be clear, you're not going to do anything this week unless you could sit down with Biden to discuss this, because you know that there's more money to move around and the real crisis happens in June. And at that time, you are going to try to stick to 2022 levels by cutting out fringe like the wokeism in defense and perhaps elsewhere.
Yeah, there's plenty of places we can find efficiencies and eliminate waste. The idea that a $1.7 trillion omnibus bill was written by two senators who were retiring, where nobody got to debate it, I know we could find a lot of places we can eliminate. The idea that you increase spending just in the last 4 years by 30%, $400 billion a year, that you added $10 trillion just with these Democrats in power. I know when we were in power for those 8 years, the discretionary spending went up zero. So what you find, like every single household, the first thing you need to do is a budget. And then you prioritize where your money should be spent. Defense is a very #1 priority.